On to our webinar that is focusing on the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education. This is the fourth in a series of 6 webinars on the Project for Excellence. And just so you know, this webinar is being recorded so that it can be accessible later, and I'll be showing you the URL for that after a bit. So I just wanted to have each of the presenters introduce themselves so that you know who we are. I am Bora Simmons, the Director of the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education, and I'm here in Eugene, Oregon.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Haynes. I'm a biology professor at Towson University, which is just outside of Baltimore. And I am here today representing the Maryland Association for Environmental and Outdoor Education. I'm a current board member and past president.
And hello, I'm Chris Mosley, and I'm at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I teach graduate and undergraduate courses in environmental education and science education.
Thank you. Just to give all of you who may or may not be familiar with Adobe Connect and the webinar site that we're using, just a little quick tour. Up at the top of your screen, there's a black ribbon, and there's a little icon with a person with his hand up. If you want to signal folks one way or the other, you can raise your hand. You can give us a message about that we need to speak a little louder or softer. You can laugh. You can do various things with the little icons throughout the webinar. And then I also wanted to point out that there is this chat box over on the left-hand side. So if you have a question for us as we go along or a comment, you can type that in the box at the bottom. You can also, if you see someone in the participant list that you would like to send a private chat to, or you wanted to send a private chat to one of the presenters, all you have to do is highlight their name with your cursor, and then off to the right there'll be a little pop-up box, and you can click on private chat, and then you can send a message to that individual. But to get things started, because this is the fourth in a series of webinars, I wanted just to ask you if you had participated in any of our previous ones. The first of our webinars focused on just an overview of the Guidelines for Excellence project. Then we had a second one that focused on the materials guidelines, and then last week one that focused on the K-12 learner guidelines. Great, so it looks like we have a couple of people who have participated previously in one of our webinars. Great, thank you very much. Helpful to know. Let's see. Eileen is saying that she is not getting audio, and I'm wondering of the other participants, are you getting audio? So is it that there's a problem with Eileen's system, or is it a problem that we have more generally? Not a problem here from Joyce. Andrea, I assume you're getting audio. Glenna, Kim. Eileen, I'm not quite sure what the answer is, and my talking probably doesn't help you if you don't get audio. So unfortunately, I don't have any great suggestions to what to do. Let me plow on. Somebody else might be able to type in a suggestion. Okay, we've got a little bit of volume control issue. But I wanted to start off with just acknowledging our primary sponsors for this project. The US EPA Office of Environmental Education has been a funder for this project since its very beginning, and we are currently being funded under a specific EPA program for the National Environmental Education program that is housed in Cornell, and it's called EE Capacity. But over the years, we've also been supported by a number of other partners, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, NEEF, the National Environmental Education Foundation. You may know them best for sponsoring National Environmental Education Week. We have considerable partnerships with the various state associations, the affiliates, and the Texas Association for Environmental Education. Chris is a member of that group. Mayo, Sarah mentioned that she's a past president and a board member of that organization. But we've also have organizational partnerships with groups like Project Learning Tree and Keep America Beautiful and Project Wild. We'd like to give you a chance to tell us just a little bit about yourselves. This helps us know where you teach, for one thing. So if you could just tell us mostly, and this is a mostly, do you teach in urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas? And if it's just really hard to decide, then there's kind of no vote. But it looks as if interesting. So the largest proportion, not by much, but largest proportion are people who work in urban areas, followed by suburban. And one more little question about yourself before we get on. And that's to ask you where or what type of educator you see yourself as being. Do you teach primarily in the pre-K through 12 classroom, or are an administrator in formal education? Are you a non-formal educator, or do you teach at a college or university level? And it does look like overwhelmingly you are non-formal educators. The project that we're going to focus on today is the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education. It is an initiative of NAAEE, which is the North American Association for Environmental Education. It's really been, the focus of it has been this notion of promoting excellence in environmental education. All of our sets of guidelines, including the one that we're going to be talking about today, were developed through a public participatory process. So the notion was that they reflect our collective wisdom as a field. We are also really, through the project, trying to engage educators in a deep discussion of what quality environmental education practice might be like, so that as we develop the guidelines and as we disseminate them and then get into the process of actually using them, we're trying to engage people in those kinds of conversations of what does it mean to be an environmental educator. And through that, we're really trying to build environmental education as a profession. There are 5 sets of guidelines. As I mentioned before, we've already had 3 webinars where we focused on the material guidelines, the learner guidelines, and just the general overview of the project. And today we're going to be focusing on the guidelines for environmental educators. And just to get your juices going and thinking about what that means, I'd like you to take one final little poll here and check the top 3, so you can't check them all, and basically tell us it's important that an environmental educator is environmentally literate, understands something about the history of environmental education, is able to distinguish between education and advocacy, knows how to use different instructional settings, can create a collaborative learning environment, and uses assessment and evaluation to improve programs. So that's interesting as you're moving through this. So there seems to be pretty much a consensus that environmental educators should be environmentally literate themselves, and then followed by the education versus advocacy issue, and then something about knowing instructional strategies, and then sort of filling on from there. Well, that's very interesting because, you know, obviously I pulled those particular items out of the guidelines in one way or the other. They're not direct statements, but they're some of the bigger ideas. The notion of the guidelines for the preparation and professional development of environmental educators is that we really built them as a means of setting recommendations about what it is that an environmental educator should know and be able to do. And as I mentioned, they were developed through a broad-based process of review and comment, which involved literally hundreds of individuals and organizations across the country. The guidelines are organized around 6 themes, and I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, but just so that you have an idea of what they encompass one way or the other. And you're going to start to see some familiar ideas from the poll that you just took. The first theme has to do with environmental literacy. And our notion here is that we would hope that an environmental educator is environmentally literate, or certainly on their way to becoming environmentally literate, and that they possess the understanding, skills, and attitudes associated with environmental literacy. You'll notice here that we have the broad idea of environmental literacy, and then it's broken down into 4 component pieces of questioning, analysis, and interpretation skills, knowledge of environmental processes and systems, and onward. Those are all components that are reflected in the Excellence in Environmental Education Guidelines for Learning K through 12. So our notion was that sort of a general hope that if we're going to be helping others become environmentally literate, and that's what's expressed in the K-12 learner guidelines, that we could use that as a benchmark for our own environmental literacy. The second theme has to do with the foundations of environmental education, and I noted that that was the lowest item on the poll in terms of at least your top 3 notions. But here what we're talking about is some sense that environmental educators understand the goals and the theory and the practice and the history of the field of environmental education, and that they can use that solid background in their own practice so that they can continue to develop. It's understanding the sort of distinction, the characteristics of environmental education. It's understanding that environmental education takes place in a variety of settings, and something a little bit hopefully about the evolution of the field and how it's related to nature study and conservation education and interpretation and other allied fields. The third theme really revolves around us as professionals. So it's trying to get at some notions of what does it mean to be an environmental educator, and what do we owe back to the field? What do we owe to ourselves in terms of becoming professionals? So here's where that notion of having an emphasis, being able to distinguish between education and advocacy comes into play, but also a very strong sense that it's important for us as professionals to continue our learning throughout our careers and to participate in professional development, such as a webinar like this today. The fourth theme gets into probably, in a lot of ways, the nitty-gritty of environmental education. So it's how do we go about planning and implementing environmental education programs? And what is it that you need to know, and what skills do you need to have in order to do that effectively? So here we're talking about knowing how to tailor our instruction to meet the needs of and challenge different learners, understanding and knowing different types of instructional methodologies, being able to plan age-appropriate environmental education instruction so that you're meeting specific goals and objectives. Knowing about the wide variety of instructional materials that are available for environmental education, and frankly, how to access them and how to use them appropriately and evaluate whether they are appropriate for your use. Understanding something about the different technologies that are available and the wide variety of settings that we can use for environmental education. The fifth of the themes really gets into the notion of how do we foster learning? How do we motivate learners? So how do we make sure that we have created a climate in which learners are intellectually stimulated and motivated to learn about the environment? How do we create an inclusive and collaborative learning environment? And how do you set up learning that's flexible and responsive to learners and their needs? So all of those are skills that are important for the environmental educator to master. And then finally, the last of the themes has to do with assessment and evaluation. So it's basically incorporating the notion that hopefully we know how to assess learner outcomes, that we understand the importance of tying assessment to learning, that it's part of our instruction and part of our continual improvement of our instruction. And that finally we use different evaluation approaches for our programs to make sure that we know how our programs are working, but that we can also continually improve our programs. So now I'm going to turn over the webinar to Sarah to tell us something about the Maryland Association and the work they've been doing and how they've been using these guidelines.
All right, so just to give you a little bit of background, Mayo, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary a couple years ago. The membership is about 60% non-formal educators and about 40% formal. And you can see there they range from classroom teachers, natural resource people, nature center staff, etc. So you have a little bit more non-formal than we do formal. Our conference is our hallmark professional development that we offer. It's a really large conference. We have about 600 to 700 people that attend every year, so it's the largest state environmental ed conference in the country, at least at the moment. Besides the conference, though, we offer a schoolyard habitat program where we'll assist teachers or non-formal educators that want to create a schoolyard habitat on their site and just might not know how to do it. We have a Green School Award program that has just really exploded lately. I just got an email this morning that we now have 20% of all the schools in Maryland that have been certified green. And we offer, we've been offering environmental literacy workshops across the state just starting this year, and that's mainly for formal educators because I don't know how many of you have heard this, but last September, Maryland instituted a graduation requirement for high school students. They have to show, the school systems have to show that their students are environmentally literate, and the way they choose to show that depends on the school system, but there's been a lot of requests lately for PD that has to do with environmental literacy. So about 5 years ago, going back in time a little bit, we came up with the idea at the Mayo Board that we were interested in offering a professional environmental educator certification program. And some of the reasons why we were thinking it was appropriate are listed on your screen there. We were thinking that most professions have some kind of certification that a person would have to go through and earn in order to practice in that field. There wasn't any such thing for environmental educators. In Maryland, there's no environmental education degree program at any of our colleges or universities at the moment. Environmental ed as a whole is really interdisciplinary, so if someone comes up to you and says, I'm an environmental educator, it could mean that they have a training in biology, it could mean that their background is more in social studies and economics, it could mean they have more of a training in environmental policy and law. So environmental educators really come to the field from different starting points, and we were thinking if we had this certification program, the people that went through that program and earned their certificate, we would know what kind of training they had, so it would make the playing field a little more level. And we were also thinking that with all the environmental literacy and environmental education programs that are going on, especially in Maryland right now, and the No Child Left Inside, our new graduation requirement, that it would be a good time to try to launch the program here in Maryland. So our application format follows the guidelines. It's set up to cover all the 6 themes that Bora mentioned. The first thing an applicant would have to do is turn in a resume, and there is a certain format that we're looking for that is posted on our certification website. So the applicant would have access to that. They would have access to the rubrics that we use to score all their materials. That resume basically covers theme 3 that Bora mentioned earlier. 2 teaching observation evaluation forms are turned in with their application packet. Those teaching observations are supposed to be made by a supervisor or superior, and in those observation forms and the rubrics that we use to score them, we're covering themes 3, 5, and 6. The lesson plans that the applicants turn in, they have to do 3 of them, and they're supposed to be lesson plans that kind of cover an entire scope and sequence of a topic. So it wouldn't be a lesson plan that would just be covered in one class period or 1 hour. We're looking for a couple of lesson plans that would look at engagement, and then a couple that would be exploration or inquiry, and then maybe a couple more that would lead to some kind of closure or extension of the topic. So it's almost more like a unit. And they cover theme 1, theme 3, 4, 5, and 6, depending on what part of the lesson plan or the program outline you're looking at. The lesson plans have to include 3 different instructional methods. We're looking for at least one of those to be investigative or inquiry-based. They should be using 3 different assessment tools. We're expecting all the plans to be aligned with our state curriculum, and core learning goals are for high school. So if the applicant is writing lessons for high school students, they have to cover those core learning goals. They have to address things like safety, how they're using the setting. We expect the setting to be outdoors for at least some of the lessons, how they're using differentiated instruction, and they have to include a personal reflection for each one of those lessons. And in the reflection, we're looking at what things they would change if they taught the lesson again, what went particularly well, maybe things that didn't go well, how would they approach it if they were teaching this lesson again for a second time. There's an online environmental literacy assessment that was written by Tom Marcinkowski at Florida Tech. And so it's password protected. They have to get a password to go online to that site and take the quiz. And the quiz is mainly ecology, biology and ecology concepts that an environmental educator would be expected to know. And the themes that are covered are listed there on the screen. And lastly, the applicants submit 2 letters of reference, and in the letters of reference, the people who are asked to write the letters are expected to address how the applicant is meeting the 6 themes that are in the guidelines.
Okay, this is Chris Mosley at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I want to share with a couple of ideas of how we've been using the guidelines in our professional development, in our coursework at the graduate and undergraduate level, and then also in our research. And I noticed that most of you that are on this webinar are non-formal educators, and we have an extended partnership with a lot of non-formal educators to have professional development with our pre-service, which are our future teachers, and our graduate students. And I'm going to share you parts of the research, not as much about the research methodology itself, but also what has this research told us about the importance of doing professional development in environmental education. So and I've picked out 2 of the major researches that is driving some of our professional development and partnerships with our non-formal educators. One of the research that we did is we used the guidelines to develop an instrument for research. The instrument is called Draw an Environment Test. It's a 2-part survey where we ask the participants just basically draw a picture of what they think the environment is, and then they use an open-ended sentence completion defining what an environment is. And then we created a rubric to assess the drawings. And that rubric is based on the definition of the environment that's found in the guidelines. The environment described the broad view. An environmental literate educator should be able to describe the broad view that environmental education takes of the environment, incorporating concepts such as systems, interdependence, and interactions among humans, other living organisms, the physical environment, and the built environment. And so what we did is we took out those 4 major factors in that definition: human interaction, living organisms, physical environment, and built environment, and put those in our rubric to evaluate the drawings. And so we have now done almost 400 drawings of pre-service teachers. These are our teachers, future teachers, they're undergraduate, and these are in the elementary and early childhood program. But these are some of the results that, it helps to shape some of the things that we're doing. 69% of all those 400 drawings had no humans in the drawing. 22% had humans, but they weren't interacting with any other factors. Only 6% had humans interacting with the abiotic, the living, and the built. 2%, a little over 2% had humans as part of a systems approach, and the factor drawn the most was abiotic, wind, sun, rocks, those kinds of things. And so what we're getting a picture of is that our pre-service teachers do not have a clear understanding of the systematic relationships of environmental factors. These are the future teachers going out into the classrooms. This is about 1 year away from student teaching. Pre-service teachers, that they don't consider humans to be a major component of the environment, and their mental models are incomplete, and that mental models is recognized through their drawings, but they're incomplete when compared to what the NAAE guidelines says that an environmental educator should have. So the implications that we're looking at is that the pre-service teachers, if they have an object view of the environment, then they may not have a need to take any responsibility for the environment. The pre-service teachers may be transmitting inaccurate models, mental models of the environment to their students. And the most critical is there's a need for more EE in pre-service education. Another large research that we're in the middle of analyzing the data is a survey that we sent out to a large list, about 800 contacts of folks that work in teacher education programs across the U.S. We were trying to find out if they are infusing EE and how they're doing it. We wanted to identify some common supports and barriers in their teacher ed programs in implementing EE. And then we also wanted to explore the extent of which the NAAEE guidelines have been integrated into their program. Some of the results that we're analyzing right now that has to do with the guidelines, 44% of those respondents, and I have to say that we got back about 220 surveys out of the initial 775. 44% of those said that they had never heard of the guidelines, and they said that 81% of their students would have never heard of the guidelines. 62% of those respondents do not use the guidelines for program development, and 67% of the respondents do not use it for program assessment. So some of the results that we're getting out of this large survey, few states offer certification or endorsements in EE. Texas is very similar to what you heard from Sarah about Maryland. We have no teacher certification and no teacher endorsement in environmental ed. There's little to no emphasis of environmental ed in teacher education programs right now. Over 85% of the states do not require any coursework in environmental ed. Over 80% of the institutions don't require environmental ed in coursework. Environmental ed emphasis is limited primarily to early childhood and elementary ed, so when it's in the programs, this tends to be the area of which it's in the most. And overall, there was very limited knowledge and usage of the guidelines for excellence. So some of the things that we're doing as we do our research that we're trying to do in our teaching is one of the things we look at assessment. And so I've created in a graduate class of teachers, they have to do a portfolio. And the portfolio basically is an edited collection of their reflections and evidence that shows their growth during the course. But it's geared around the 6 themes of the EE guidelines. They have to show at least 2 pieces of evidence and a reflection about each piece of evidence to show that they have acquired the knowledge and skills in those EE guidelines. So this is one example of what we're doing in terms of teaching. Some of the things that's going on in terms of service in our state that gears around the guidelines. We are in the middle of writing the Texas Environmental Literacy Plan. There are states, and some of you may be in those states, that have different versions of environmental literacy plan, but we're using the guidelines to help direct our writing of this plan. We also have, similar to Maryland, Texas Environmental Education Certification. I won't go into detail because ours is similar to what Maryland's doing, and we're going to be doing some revisions to that in hopes of getting it accredited by NAAEE. And then one of the things that we have in Texas, we have no Texas certification or endorsement of EE, but we do have something called Certificate of Recognition. These are for teachers, and teachers can take 45 hours of approved professional development and then apply to receive this Certificate of Recognition. So what we have done in our pre-service program is that we have incorporated approved environmental ed programs such as Project Learning Tree, Globe, and some of these other programs. So by the time that they graduate, they are now eligible to receive this Certificate of Recognition. So we don't have EE courses. We can't have those courses because of other courses mandated by the state. So we are now basically infusing our coursework, infusing environmental ed into our existing coursework, and we're using the guidelines to help inform us as to the best way to infuse EE.
And you caught me right in the middle of responding to a check. But that's okay. So no, you are absolutely right, and I'll just say to Joyce, I finished answering your question after I'm done with this little bit here. So for this notion, there's, with what Sarah has just walked us through and what Chris has walked us through, there's good news and there's bad news. The great news is that a lot of the states are developing these state
Yeah.
EE professional certification programs that are built off of the guidelines, and using the environmental education and the guidelines within their courses for the development of pre-service teacher programs, just as Chris sort of walked through, and using them as a framework to be able to uh, think about the research and think about what we need to do in terms of professional development. And obviously, from Chris's results of the last study that she talked about, the nationwide study, is that we are on a steep hill trying to move forward in terms of teacher preparation in particular, and trying to get environmental education infused into those programs, and hopefully having them look at things like the guidelines as a tool for developing those kinds of programs. So things that NAAE has been doing to try to push that rock up the hill in a lot of ways is two different initiatives. One is through something called NCATE. I guess three initiatives when you consider the certification programs. But the NCATE program is that NCATE is the National Council for the Accreditation of Teacher Education. And it's a huge organization that is um, responsible for accrediting well over, and Chris, you probably know the numbers better than I do, but it's somewhat like 600 teacher preparation institutions across the country. It's a large percentage
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yeah,
are
yeah.
accredited through NCATE.
A little over half of the teacher ed
And
programs
one
right
of
now
the
that
things
exist in
that
the United
NCATE
States
does is that they're
through
they are an
MCATE. That's correct.
organization of organizations. So they're responsible for accrediting these universities and their teacher preparation programs. But how they do that is that they have member organizations like NSTA, the National Science Teachers Association, and NCSS, the National Council for the Social Studies, and NAAEE is a member of NCATE. And each of those organizations, and there's 30 some of them, are allowed to create their own set of standards. So when a college or university prepares science teachers, they not only use the overall arching NCATE standards, they also use standards that are developed specifically by NSTA for science educators. What we've done is we've created the standards for the initial preparation of environmental educators. There's been approved by NCATE. They were approved back in 2007, and they're now being implemented. So there are universities out there that are using these standards for the development of their teacher preparation programs. And then what they do is they submit paperwork to NCATE, and we take a look at it, and we're able to accredit them and say that they are meeting our standards. Those standards were derived from the guidelines. So there's a lot of overlap between the guidelines and our NCATE standards. And then a second initiative that is in process right now is that we recognize that if there's about half, a little bit more than half of these teacher preparation institutions out there that are NCATE approved or accredited, then that means obviously that there's 45% or so that are not part of the NCATE system. And there's lots of different reasons why an institution may not be part of NCATE. Some states just use their own accreditation program. It's an expensive process to be part of NCATE. There's just lots of reasons why, an institution may not be part of it. So our notion was that why not use all of the work that has gone into the guidelines and into the NCATE standards development process, and why not develop a national certificate of distinction for environmental education programs that would be separate from NCATE. So a program such as Chris's program might be able to apply because her university is not an NCATE institution. So we would, we as NAAE might be able to then recognize her program for the excellence and the work that they're doing. And as Sarah mentioned, there are lots of states that don't have degree programs, or so that environmental education is infused through another program. It might be infused through a biology or a natural resources program. It might be infused in the elementary education or the early childhood program, as Chris mentioned. So this is something that we're in the process of developing. We're hoping that we're going to get it up and running soon, in the scheme of things, within the next year or so. But it would be our way of continuing that use of the guidelines and the NCATE standards to really encourage programs, colleges and universities to develop these programs and to build them in some sort of coherent and cohesive way. What I wanted to mention as we start to wind down on the webinar is that there are different ways that you can learn more about the guidelines if you would like to. One is that we have something called the Guidelines Trainers Bureau. And these are individuals who have gone through training around the guidelines and are knowledgeable about them and are themselves good facilitators. And what we're able to do is match those individuals with a group that would like to have professional development around any one of the sets of guidelines. So it's not just around the preparation and professional development guidelines. It could be around the early childhood guidelines or the non-formal guidelines. And as of right now, because we have funding through EPA, we're able to support those workshops and pay for the travel of the Guidelines Trainers Bureau person to come and facilitate a workshop. We're able to provide the books for that workshop, and basically the only cost to the hosting organization is to find a place for us to meet and to find us an audience for those workshops. So if that's something that might be of interest to you, please just send me an email and I can chat with you offline about it. One of the other things I wanted to point out to you is that obviously you found our webinar today. We are going to have 2 more webinars, and information about those webinars is posted up on EE Linked, which is run by NAAE. And the URL is there, eelinked.net/n/guidelines. And if you go up to that, up to EE Linked, what you're going to find is all sorts of information about each of the different sets of guidelines. So additional information about the early childhood and the non-formal guidelines and the preparation and professional development guidelines. And for each one of the sets of guidelines, as well as the listing of the webinars, for each one of the guidelines, there's at least one page, and you're able to go up to that page and click on the PDF icon that's over in the right-hand side there, and you can actually download the set of guidelines. So they're free and available to download. You can also purchase hard copies of the guidelines directly from NAAEE if you would like. So that's just the URL again so that you can find it easily and be able to access any of the sets of guidelines. And in terms of the future webinars, next week we have one on the non-formal EE program, Guidelines for Excellence, and then we have a little bit of a hiatus, and towards the end of June, our final webinar, which is going to be on the early childhood EE programs, Guidelines for Excellence. And again, the listing of how to sign up and register for the webinar, and then if you missed one of our previous webinars, the URL to be able to access it afterwards is available up on EE Linked. One of the last things that I wanted to point out to you was that we are in the process of developing a new set of guidelines that's going to focus on community environmental education. And Akima Price is heading up that process. So if this is something that is of interest to you, I would encourage you to contact Akima. We're still in the process of trying to develop an initial framework of what are the components, what are the key characteristics of community environmental education programs. And once we get that, we'll be posting them up on EE Linked and in a variety of other places so that people can comment on them. And then we'll revise, and then we'll allow people to comment again and revise back and forth until they're finally published. So I wanted to just open it up now for any questions that people had. You can use the chat function for that. And I'm going to go to the last screen here just to, while you're thinking about those questions, I'll make my pitch that we have our conference coming up in October in Oakland, California, and it should be a wonderful conference. So I hope that we will be able to see you there. Responding to someone's private chat here for a second, and then go to everyone and see. Great. Yes, if you go, the question about the NCATE standards, EE Linked, you can see them there. Also, if you go up to the NCATE site themselves, so ncate.org, you can go to standards and the program standards and look under NAAE, and that'll take you there. Akima's address again. So yes, let me get back to that. You got it. Thank you. Thank you.
I got it.
So the question is, does NAA have folks who can be hired to run a workshop? I think it depends on the topic of your particular workshop, but if it's focused around the guidelines in particular, then at least for now, as long as we have funding, we're able to basically ask one of the Guidelines Trainers Bureau members to facilitate it, and we through the grant we're able to pay for all of their costs, their travel and their hotel and food and all that kind of stuff. They are all volunteers, which is really, really wonderful. So if you wanted to hire them and give them a bit of an honorarium, I'm sure our facilitators would appreciate that. And NAA does do other professional development. They sponsor various other webinars and obviously the conference and such. So are there other questions out there? Okay. So Rachel was just saying about hiring environmental educators to work at school sites in I'm assuming that's San Francisco Unified School District. Um, and
Yeah.
to give a solid EE background. And yes, there are people in the Bay Area I can recommend to you who know quite a bit about
Yeah.
environmental education and certainly know about the guidelines if you would like that kind of part of an introduction for your professional development programs. If you go up to that EE linked website, the guidelines website, there is one of the topics on the left hand side. So you can click on a topic of the preparation professional development guidelines, and you click on that, and that's where you can access the PDFs and such. If you scan down it, there actually is a link that would help you find the names, at least, of members of the Guidelines Trainers Bureau. So it doesn't give their contact information because I just don't really want them to be abused. But since we know about you know what happens when you post your emails and such up online. But there is a button that you can push for Guidelines Trainers Bureau, and it lists the names of the individuals by state. So you can take a look and see who in your state is a facilitator, and if you know them, obviously you can contact them directly. But you can, go through me, and I can sort of be matchmaker. And if you take a look and there's no one in your state who is a member of the Guidelines Trainers Bureau, we would be able to, again, find somebody who is maybe close to you or has a special area of expertise. So, as an example, if you want to have a workshop that is focusing on guidelines for the preparation and professional development of environmental educators, and you're looking at a university, sort of college or university group of people as your audience, then I might suggest that Chris Mosley would be a good person to come and do a workshop since she works at the university level and is doing that sort of teacher preparation. So are there other questions that people have?
Yeah.
Yes.
Bora, I might add, just because the audience appears to be more non-formal than formal educators, from what we're finding because of our research and the work that we're doing with professional development, and because of most of the states not requiring formal environmental education for teachers or for children, it becomes very important that we work with our non-formal partners. And so we have developed a very strong extended partnership because we rely on them to help us to give that professional development to our students. We host some of our coursework and professional development at some of the nature areas, natural areas. We use them as speakers, field trips, and so I really encourage those of you that are in non-formal to look at those that are in the formal teacher ed and partner with them, because in most states it's not part of the teacher ed program to have coursework at environmental ed. So
I think
it's
for
been
those
very
of you who are
successful for
familiar
us
with
to do it this way
a
and have
number
this
of the
partnership.
national programs like Project Learning Tree and Project Wild and Project WET, one of their main targets is to get into the pre-service teacher education, and often their workshops are being facilitated by non-formal educators. So it is that partnership between the colleges and universities and trying to get the attention of the university faculty who might be interested in incorporating environmental education and the non-formal educators. And I think there's a lot of movement right now with looking at things like the Green Ribbon School Award Program, and the things that Sarah was talking about of what a high percentage of their schools are green schools. So there's a lot of movement within formal education and within teacher education, but we have a long ways to go. The guidelines were really developed both for that pre-service audience, and why they're called the professional development guidelines is that they were also developed with the notion of being able to help those of us who are out in the field. So for the non-formal educators as well as practicing teachers, to help us improve our practice. So they're an umbrella view of what it means to be an environmental educator. But the non-formal educator is essential to our success within formal education. There's no question about that. Any last questions or comments from my colleagues, my co-presenters? Doesn't seem like it. So I think we will end the webinar now, and just say that thank you very much for attending. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your questions and your comments along the way. And I would personally very much like to thank Chris and Sarah for taking all of the time of putting this together and the work that they're doing in their states for environmental education and for the field in general, and in developing research, developing programs like the certification programs, working on the MCATE initiatives, infusing it into their coursework, helping the Green School initiatives. So all of these things are extremely important for us to, in terms of developing our profession. So thank you all very much. I will be posting the URL for the recording of the webinar probably by sometime tomorrow. It takes a little while for it to go through the process through Adobe Connect, and so those of you who missed part of it would be able to go back and listen to it. Or if you have colleagues that you think might be interested, you can forward that URL onto them. I will, so the URL will be posted on the EE Linked website, but I'll also send out an email to everyone who registered for the webinar so that you can go directly to the URL. So again, thank you all very much. Appreciate your attention, and hope to see you in October at the NAAE conference. So, bye for now.